The fundamental calculus of enterprise software valuation has fractured. The era of the application-level monopoly is over. We are looking at a permanent structural shift. Anthropic's release of Claude 5.5 and Mythos 5 is not a mere product update that you can casually add to your tech stack. It is a deployment that immediately forces capital markets and chief information officers to reassess the mathematical viability of the traditional seat-based pricing model. For 2 decades, software providers have monopolized the user interface layer. They generated massive, predictable, recurring revenue by forcing human operators to navigate their proprietary dashboards across distinct, isolated operational silos. We are talking about enterprise resource planning, customer relationship management, and human resources information systems. That structural advantage is now dissolving in real time. Raw computational intelligence is rapidly commoditizing. Autonomous agents are actively bypassing the user interface entirely, choosing instead to interact directly with the underlying database. This explainer will rigorously decode the architectural reality of this shift. We are going to ignore the vendor marketing hype. Instead, we will examine the macroeconomic variables, the severe technical debt, and the specific human mechanics required to survive the integration of autonomous systems into your core enterprise workflows. Here is the agenda for this explainer. First, the high-stakes hook and executive overview. Second, a detailed operational post-mortem. Third, the human blueprint. And fourth, the chronological action plan and guardrails.
Section 1. High-stakes hook and executive overview. The market fracture. $830 billion. That is the total market value that global software and services stocks shed over a devastating 6-day trading period. This massive capital flight did not happen in a vacuum. It occurred as institutional investors systematically reassessed the existential threat that large language models pose to the traditional application layer. We are witnessing the forced transition from user-facing software to invisible, agentic workflows. When autonomous agents demonstrate the capacity to bypass traditional user interfaces and execute complex, multi-step operations directly within the system of record, the financial justification for charging per-seat licenses completely collapses. Consider a standard procurement workflow within your own organization. Historically, this required an analyst to open a dashboard, cross-reference inventory, draft a purchase order, and route it for approval across multiple paid user seats. If a single integrated agent can accomplish the analytical, coding, and operational tasks previously distributed across 50 human seats in a matter of seconds, the traditional software-as-a-service revenue model requires immediate defensive restructuring. The market understands this math perfectly. Capital is aggressively retreating from companies that merely sell interfaces, demanding instead platforms that provide unyielding, compliant data architecture.
The afternoon Anthropic announced the Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models, the market reacted with immediate and ruthless precision. Capital punished companies that are fundamentally reliant on per-seat pricing. Workday fell 3.1%. Oracle dropped 3.1%. Palantir Technologies shed 3.2%. While these percentage drops might appear contained on a chart, they represent billions in evaporated market capitalization in a matter of hours. These companies have spent decades building deep, impenetrable vertical moats. Workday monopolized human capital management workflows. Oracle dominated complex database and supply chain ledgers. Palantir secured defense and intelligence analytics. Yet, all three face the exact same structural vulnerability today. They are suddenly exposed to AI-native competition that does not require human operators to manually manipulate their systems. Investors are demanding to know if enterprise software vendors can mathematically defend their pricing power when frontier models are capable of owning the workflow orchestration layer. If an API-native agent can retrieve an employee record, calculate payroll variances, and update the ledger without a human ever logging into the Workday interface, the vendor loses its daily active user metrics. When those metrics drop, the valuation multiples inevitably follow.
Anthropic's partnership with Intuit provides the exact blueprint for survival in this new ecosystem. Raw computational power is completely useless without deep, industry-specific data context and strict compliance integration. Mid-market businesses are not looking for a generalized chatbot to write emails. They require customized, secure AI agents engineered for their unique operational DNA. Regional restaurant groups or construction subcontractors face strict regulatory requirements. They deal with SOC 2 compliance, GDPR mandates, and complex state tax codes. By integrating Anthropic's Claude Agent SDK directly into the Intuit platform, Intuit allows these businesses to orchestrate agents that automatically connect project timelines, workforce hours, and subcontractor payments directly to their cash flow forecast. The frontier model provides the reasoning engine. The software vendor provides the rigid, compliant boundaries. The defensive moat for enterprise software is no longer the slick dashboard itself. The moat is the compliant, domain-specific workflow and the thousands of rows of historical data required to train the agent on deterministic outcomes.
Enterprise software providers are not obsolete. They are, however, engaged in a critical battle for the system of record. These vendors still control the regulatory workflows, the enterprise-grade security models, and the massive historical customer-specific data lakes. However, to survive what the market is calling the SaaS extinction event, they must urgently defend their workflow orchestration layer. They must prove to enterprise buyers that their platforms can connect AI infrastructure into a defensible operating model that delivers measurable business outcomes, rather than simply gating access to a user interface. If the AI agent becomes the primary interface for work, the underlying software must pivot to become the invisible, unyielding foundation of truth. This requires a massive architectural pivot. Vendors must transition from building user-facing web applications to building highly resilient infrastructural APIs. These APIs must feed perfectly structured data directly into the reasoning engine of autonomous agents without friction and without failure.
Section 2. Detailed operational post-mortem. Process before platform.
The Model Context Protocol fundamentally accelerates enterprise adoption timelines. You need to think of the Model Context Protocol as the universal standard for AI integration. It is the necessary bridge that entirely replaces bespoke, brittle REST API connections. Historically, connecting a frontier model to an enterprise resource planning system required custom code, extensive API documentation review, and a dedicated team of integration developers operating on prolonged, expensive sprint cycles. Today, the architecture is different. Vendors build a single Model Context Protocol server. This server instantly and securely communicates with Claude, ChatGPT, or any other frontier model designed to speak the protocol. This engineering standardizes bidirectional communication at the foundational level. It forces the data exchange to occur in a structured, predictable format, effectively eliminating the translation layers that previously introduced unacceptable latency and data corruption. This architectural shift is exactly why we are witnessing more enterprise connectors launching in a single quarter than in the entirety of the previous decade.
This taxonomy dictates your deployment strategy and your corresponding organizational risk profile. Not all integrations are structurally sound. Tier 1 represents the gold standard. These are native connectors like HubSpot and Oracle NetSuite. In these environments, the vendor has built direct integration, allowing seamless read, write, and update capabilities that strictly respect your existing permission boundaries without any middleware interference. Tier 2 relies on Model Context Protocol servers, such as Sage Intacct and Microsoft Dynamics 365. This tier offers programmatic access that requires targeted technical configuration by your architecture team, but remains robust, auditable, and secure. Tier 3 is architecturally catastrophic for enterprise AI. This involves relying on fragile middleware like Zapier or Make to connect platforms like Zoho and Pipedrive. Middleware introduces severe latency, arbitrary token limits, webhook failures, and massive compliance breaches. Relying on a third-party server to pass sensitive enterprise financial data between your database and a large language model shatters your security perimeter entirely. You must avoid Tier 3 architecture when deploying autonomous agents.
The industry is currently suffocating under vendor marketing hype that promises instant, frictionless automation of all business workflows. This is a dangerous fiction that you must reject. The real-world technical debt of your organization will brutally dictate your success or failure in this transition. Autonomous systems are unforgiving. They require impeccably structured data, clean financial ledgers, and absolute mathematical strictness regarding permission parity. Automating a broken workflow simply scales your operational inefficiency at the speed of computation. Consider a hypothetical, yet common, scenario where an autonomous agent is granted write access to a siloed, contradictory accounts payable ledger. If the underlying data architecture contains duplicate vendor profiles, conflicting payment terms, and outdated routing numbers, the AI agent will not magically fix the discrepancy. It will confidently execute hundreds of incorrect vendor payments in seconds before a human controller can intervene. Process must unequivocally precede the platform.
To understand execution at scale, look at Tata Consultancy Services. TCS is operating as customer zero, aggressively deploying Claude to 50,000 of its own employees across 56 countries before packaging it for highly regulated client environments. They are systematically testing the friction points in their own engineering, finance, and legal teams first. They understand that in sectors like life sciences and banking, deploying frontier models requires profound, uncompromising regulatory discipline. TCS is building custom, industry-specific offerings, such as claims processing for insurers via Diligenta, which serves over 22 million policyholders in the United Kingdom. Processing medical claims or financial equities requires rigid adherence to HIPAA and SEC compliance rules. In these highly regulated environments, deploying autonomous agents is not a simple software update. It is an orchestrated, high-stakes architectural transformation that demands absolute deterministic outcomes and flawless auditability.
Section 3. The Human Blueprint, Identity Capital, and Change Fatigue.
We must analyze the profound psychological friction of this deployment. Change fatigue is the severe organizational exhaustion stemming from relentless, mandated technological shifts. But with autonomous agents, organizations face a much deeper operational crisis. We are witnessing the rapid erosion of professional identity capital. When software vendors externalize the user interface to AI agents, they fundamentally alter the daily professional identity of your workforce. Consider an enterprise resource planning manager, whose entire career capital and organizational value is built on navigating complex software menus, running bespoke queries, and executing highly specific manual data reconciliations. Replacing that complex interface mastery with a simple conversational AI prompt is deeply threatening to their livelihood and their sense of worth. If executive leadership ignores this loss of identity capital, they will face catastrophic, passive user resistance. This resistance will manifest as deliberate shadow IT, a stubborn refusal to validate model outputs, union grievances, and massive talent churn among your most experienced operators. This psychological threat is real, and it will permanently stall any projected return on investment if you do not manage it.
The Fable 5 governance crisis proves a permanent reality for enterprise integration. Model capability is completely inseparable from model control. Anthropic faced a severe governance crisis shortly after launch when enterprise users discovered that invisible guardrails in Fable 5 were quietly altering or degrading responses for certain high-risk corporate prompts, entirely without informing the end user. This opaque interference forced Anthropic to issue a public apology and execute a frantic recalibration of their safety systems. You cannot secure user trust if the system's guardrails are hidden from the operator. For chief information officers and enterprise architects, this event defined the modern boundary of trust. If your workforce does not mathematically understand why a model is restricting an action or degrading a response, they will actively bypass the authorized system. They will copy proprietary enterprise data into unmonitored consumer-grade large language models on their personal devices, creating massive security vulnerabilities and entirely defeating your carefully constructed compliance perimeter. Transparency is a security requirement.
The architectural solution to this trust deficit is the absolute enforcement of the human-in-the-loop imperative. This requires a strict, enforced separation between read-only data synthesis and write-access state changes. Anthropic's integration with Intuit QuickBooks and PayPal demonstrates this architecture perfectly. The system is engineered to mandate that the human user approves every single action before anything sends, posts, or pays. The agent is permitted to retrieve unstructured data, reconcile the complex ledgers, flag specific mismatches, draft a plain English profit and loss statement, and export a complete financial close packet. However, it is mathematically barred from executing the final state change. This is not merely a beta safety feature. It is a psychological and regulatory requirement. It preserves the human operator's ultimate authority and operational liability. This mitigates the erosion of their professional identity while utilizing the agent purely to eliminate the tedious clerical extraction and formatting phases of the work. The human remains the critical validator.
Section 4. Chronological Action Plan and Guardrails. Securing the core.
This is your required deployment timeline. Phase A, stability is non-negotiable. You must secure baseline core integrity before introducing any AI optimization layers into your stack. Month 1 is strictly dedicated to secured data migration and standardization across all active servers. Month 2 requires the aggressive, manual cleaning and reconciliation of all financial ledgers. Month 3 is dedicated entirely to inventory and process validation, demanding your architecture team map exactly how data currently flows through your existing physical and cloud infrastructure. Only in month 4 do you begin the careful deployment of autonomous agents, and only into a heavily monitored staging environment. This sequence requires immense manual labor and unyielding operational discipline. Large language models do not solve bad data. They weaponize it. If you attempt to accelerate this timeline and deploy agents onto corrupt ledgers or unvalidated legacy processes, you are directly engineering your own operational collapse.
This sequence demonstrates a controlled agent-assisted workflow that strictly preserves human authority over financial outlays. This is the definitive blueprint for secure AI deployment in financial environments. In Step 1, the agent utilizes specific API calls to automatically settle the QuickBooks cash position against incoming PayPal settlement data. It pulls from millions of rows of transaction history in seconds, achieving a reconciliation rate impossible for human teams. In Step 2, the agent applies complex forecasting algorithms to build a predictive 30-day cash flow model based entirely on deterministic historical data. Step 3 introduces the unyielding human bottleneck. The agent pauses the workflow, forcing a designated human controller to review all highlighted margin variances and underperforming metrics flagged by the model. Step 4 executes the payments, but only after explicit cryptographic authorization from the human controller. The architecture is clear. The agent calculates, but the human commits.
These are the non-negotiable enterprise guardrail mandates you must ruthlessly enforce across all vendor contracts moving forward. First, you demand zero default training on your organization's proprietary data. Your internal data is not free training material for their foundational models. Second, you require strict mathematical inheritance of existing enterprise resource planning permissions. This means your Active Directory or Okta role-based access controls must map one-to-one to the agent's vector database retrieval logic. If an employee cannot access a sensitive human resources file in your native corporate drive, the AI agent must be mathematically restricted from retrieving or referencing that file for that specific user. Third, you demand transparent, immutable audit trails recording the exact logic and data provenance behind every single agent action. Fourth, secure access must be governed by required OAuth 2.0 authentication protocols. You must assert these 4 points as unyielding executive mandates before signing any procurement order.
As K. Krithivasan correctly identifies here, raw intelligence is merely a commodity. In the next decade of enterprise software, anyone can rent access to a frontier model via a cheap API key. The true defensible premium lies entirely in architectural orchestration, deep business context, and unyielding regulatory discipline. The winners of the 2030 enterprise software landscape will not be the organizations with the smartest standalone chatbots. The market will belong entirely to the organizations that successfully weave autonomous intelligence deeply into complex, highly regulated legacy systems without breaking compliance boundaries or corrupting the underlying system of record. Context and architecture are the final remaining moats. You must build your strategy around securing them. This brings us to the baseline mandate. Do not allow vendor urgency to compromise your foundational architecture. As a technology leader, you will face immense, relentless pressure from software sales representatives. You will also face pressure from your own board of directors. They are driven by the fear of missing out, demanding you deploy AI rapidly to demonstrate modern capabilities to shareholders. You must resist this pressure with absolute executive authority. Deploying a Model Context Protocol server into a Tier 1 environment like NetSuite or Salesforce is incredibly powerful, but it is only viable if your underlying trust boundaries and data structures are heavily fortified. You must equip your architecture teams with the exact language required to push back against a board that wants artificial intelligence deployed immediately, regardless of your organization's actual data readiness. The sequence is rigid for a vital reason. Secure the perimeter, clean the data, then, and only then, deploy the intelligent agent. If you invert this process, the agent will simply amplify your existing systemic errors and create compliance violations at a speed and scale that your human auditing teams will be completely unable to contain. Operational excellence in the AI era is entirely dependent on the unglamorous, foundational work of structural data hygiene. Consider the severe risk of internal prompt injection attacks. If your internal perimeter is weak, an employee could easily craft a malicious prompt designed to force the agent to bypass its authorized constraints and surface unredacted payroll data from the enterprise resource planning system. Securing the perimeter means aggressively auditing these specific internal vulnerabilities before granting the model access to your core infrastructure.
Pause the procurement. Fix the foundation first. The technology is undeniably ready. The real question is whether your enterprise is disciplined enough to wield it safely. Bring this question to your next leadership meeting. Demand a mathematical, architectural answer, not a marketing promise. This concludes The Explainer. Stay focused on the fundamentals.